Welcome back to Film Recap. Today I will show you a gripping story that kicks off at a military airfield in Scotland, where the atmosphere is charged with pure panic. Personnel are scrambling because a hijacked commercial airliner is headed straight for their runway. To handle this nightmare, the military deploys Colonel Drummond. The moment his boots hit the tarmac, an officer rushes over with a grim update. The tower believes the captain and the co-pilot have already been executed, and worse yet, intelligence confirms that a red-flagged operative from a German terror database is confirmed to be on board. With no time to waste, Drummond bolts directly toward the Tactical Operations Center. Inside, one controller is desperately barking descent coordinates over the radio, while another tracks the radar blip closely. Moments later, the massive aircraft screeches onto the tarmac, executing a dangerously erratic touchdown. The second the wheels stop, Drummond demands eyes on the fuselage and tries to establish a comms link to gauge the horror inside. Suddenly, a cabin door cracks open and a parachute deploys into the wind. The tracking team watches in disbelief as a young child dangles from the straps, drifting down to earth. Drummond barks an order, sending two military transport trucks racing across the field to secure the boy. Right then, a sniper spots a silhouette moving inside the cockpit. Drummond instantly patches into the radio frequency, issuing a cold ultimatum: make one wrong move, and his men will open fire with lethal intent. He commands the individual to take the captain's chair and slowly put his hands where they can see them. The panicked voice on the other end pleads for a chance to step outside and explain, desperately yelling that he isn't one of the hijackers. Drummond decides to send a linguistic specialist to interview the rescued child. We learn the boy's name is Tom, and he's currently surrounded by medics conducting an emergency evaluation. Unfortunately, the trauma has locked Tom down completely. He's frozen in a state of catatonic shock. To understand how he got here, we rewind the clock 24 hours. In a quiet hotel suite, Tom's mother, Sophie, is in the restroom prepping themselves for an upcoming transatlantic flight. She dials a medical professional based in New York, which is their final destination. This trip is a desperate bid to find a cure for a highly classified condition consuming her. Outside the bathroom, Tom calls out, confirming he's finished packing all their bags. By nightfall, the pair arrives at the terminal. After clearing the standard security checkpoints, the mother and son make their way toward the departure lounge. Before boarding commences, Sophie slips away into the restroom stall. She unzips a hidden medical kit, carefully drawing a strange liquid into a clear syringe. She swallows a dose from a small vial, and her body instantly reacts to the volatile chemical compound. Trembling, she plunges the needle directly into her vein. Meanwhile, out in the waiting area, a traveler named Fareed is wrapping up a phone call. Young Tom strikes up a casual conversation with him, and the two share a warm, friendly interaction. Fareed asks where his mother went. Right on cue, Sophie emerges from the restroom to join them, and the family unit finally boards the aircraft to locate their assigned seats. As the cabin settles, the lead flight attendant enters the flight deck, asking the captain and his first officer, Bastian, if they need a caffeine fix. She heads back down the aisle toward the galley to brew the coffee. Along the way, she flags a crew member named 8-Ball, instructing him to deal with a highly disruptive passenger making a scene in first class. Within minutes, the heavy aircraft lifts off from the German runway, charting a direct course for American airspace. Hours drag by in total silence until Sophie finally returns to her row from the lavatory. She opens up her personal journal to write, but pauses when she flips to a tucked-away photograph of her and her late husband. Staring at the image triggers a flood of dark memories. The mental flashback begins with a picture-perfect family scene, but the dream quickly turns into a living hell. She recalls a terrifying day when her family vehicle broke down, leaving them completely stranded in the middle of a desolate wilderness. Her husband decided to hike out into the unknown to locate a rescue team, leaving Sophie alone to guard their infant son. Back in the present reality of the flight, Sophie's hypersensitive instincts detect a disturbance breaking out near the front curtain. 8-Ball is aggressively engaging with a hostile traveler. Suddenly, an undercover air marshal steps in to neutralize the threat. Within seconds, a backup marshal rushes down the aisle to assist his partner, but the entire situation is a calculated trap. While the two lawmen are distracted, 8-Ball pulls a concealed blade and drives it straight into the second marshal's chest. Simultaneously, the unruly passenger reveals himself as an accomplice, tackling the primary marshal. 8-Ball looks around, demanding to know the whereabouts of the third operative. The moment the location is confirmed, a ruthless hijacker is sent into the cabin to eliminate the final security threat. A man named Curtiz executes the third lawman, claims his service weapon, and reports back to 8-Ball. What follows is so excessively savage that it deeply unnerves their fellow conspirator, Carl. 8-Ball brutally executes the remaining marshal right on the floor. Sensing the shifting air pressure and the underlying dread, Sophie realizes the vessel is fully compromised. Suddenly, 8-Ball marches back into the main cabin. He points his weapon at the crowd, barking orders for everyone to stay glued to their cushions. Instantly, the rest of the terror cell reveals themselves, drawing weapons. They begin aggressively herding the terrified passengers toward the very back of the aircraft. On the opposite end, a cold cold-blooded operative named Berg approaches the flight deck and pounds on the security door. The moment Bastian unlocks it, Berg steps inside and calmly announces that the captain has already been taken care of. The hijackers open a floor hatch and dump the captain's lifeless body unceremoniously into the lower cargo hold. Berg grabs the PA system, broadcasting a chilling message to the cabin. He informs the passengers that the flight is officially under new management, ordering everyone to keep their hands flat on the headrests in front of them. Down below, a heavily bearded tech expert named Yuri intercepts the black box, manipulating its components to rewrite the flight telemetry. Once the hack is complete, he enters the cockpit. He gives Berg the green light, and the co-pilot is forced to bank the massive plane hard, altering its destination. Back in the cabin, young Tom is gripping his seat, terrified for his mother's safety. Sophie whispers to him, keeping her voice steady and telling him to remain perfectly still. Tom, studying the light tracking through the windows, identifies a specific row where the angle will shield her completely from the direct rays of the sun. Suddenly, Curtiz rips Farid from his seat, dragging him toward the front lines. Meanwhile, Carl is trying to de-escalate 8-Ball's growing erratic behavior. Exploiting the distraction, Tom slips out of his seat and bolts down the aisle. A horrified Sophie immediately gives chase to protect her son, but 8-Ball catches the movement and spins around. Right before the boy's eyes, 8-Ball fires a round directly into Sophie's chest. The poor kid shatters emotionally, screaming in absolute agony. 8-Ball violently grabs the hysterical child, but Carl quickly steps in, yanking Tom away, forcing him back into his seat and commanding him to stay silent if he wants to live. A few moments later, Berg crosses paths with Curtiz in the narrow corridor, where he learns about the blood spilled in the aisle. Fuming with rage, Berg corners 8-Ball, leveling a threat. If he acts out of turn again, Berg will personally put a bullet in his skull. Even so, Berg decides to weaponize Sophie's apparent execution, using it as a grim warning to keep the remaining passengers submissive. The narrative then shifts heavily back into a dark memory. We return to the stranded vehicle, where a younger Sophie sits, clutching her baby, desperately waiting for her husband's return. When the hours stretch too long, she can no longer sit still. She steps out into the biting cold and begins tracking her husband's deep boot prints into the thick woods. Deep in the wilderness, she stumbles upon a decaying, isolated homestead. Hoping to find her husband safe inside, she pushes the door open. Instead, her eyes land on a trail of fresh blood slicked across the floorboards. She follows the crimson stains straight down a creaking staircase into a pitch-black cellar. Suddenly, a feral, monstrous entity screeches from the shadows, lunging at her. Sophie barely manages to slam a heavy basement door, locking herself inside the inner room. But the relief is short-lived. Turning around, her world shatters. Her husband's mangled body lies lifeless on the concrete. Before she can process the grief, the creature breaks through the cellar window, clawing at her. During the desperate struggle, the beast sinks its fangs deep into her flesh. But as dawn breaks, a single beam of pure sunlight hits the monster, instantly incinerating it into ash. Back on the plane, Sophie's eyes snap open. The vampire's curse has kept her alive, preventing her from dying from the gunshot wound. She can hear the distant, muffled barking of guard dogs echoing from the lower decks. Spotting an open maintenance hatch, she quietly slips down into the dark underbelly of the aircraft. In a separate compartment, Berg has Farid cornered at gunpoint alongside two of his crew, forcing him to read a scripted terrorist manifesto into a recording device. Deep within the cargo hold, Curtis and Yuri are rummaging through suitcases to locate the components needed to assemble a makeshift explosive device. Sophie quickly drops low, sliding beneath a parked vehicle. Yuri stays behind to prime the bomb detonator. Seizing her chance, a starving Sophie creeps toward one of the caged transport dogs and begins violently draining its blood. The animal lets out a series of agonizing, high-pitched whimpers that echo through the hold. Irritated by the racket, Yuri walks back to investigate the source of the noise. The moment his flashlight illuminates Sophie hiding under the vehicle, she strikes. With supernatural speed, she launches herself at his throat, tearing him apart in seconds. Meanwhile, upstairs, Farid is shoved back into the main cabin, sliding into the row right next to a terrified Tom. Down in the dark, Sophie's anatomy undergoes a terrifying change as the vampire virus takes complete control. Her fangs elongate and her features morph into something predatory. Terrified of losing her mind, she scrambles for her medical kit to prepare a suppressing injection. But before she can plunge the needle, she overhears Berg's voice crackling over a nearby radio. He tells the crew that they have exactly 10 minutes before they parachute out. Realizing her son is about to be left to die on a doomed plane, Sophie abandons the suppressor. She returns to Yuri's fresh corpse, drinking his human blood to fully unleash her dark power. Enhanced and lethal, she stalks back up through the floor hatches toward the main passenger cabin. Up top, the hijackers are playing a psychological game, lying to the crowd that if anyone moves, a lethal chemical gas will flood the vents. The cell members descend into the lower hold to check on the delay, only to find Yuri's mangled body. The surviving dog stands nearby, a deliberate staging by Sophie to make it look like an animal attack. Seizing the chaos, Sophie slips into the back row, scooping up Tom. Tom. The surrounding passengers catch a glimpse of her monstrous face and begin screaming in terror. Convinced the hijackers have released the toxic gas. Ignoring the panic, Sophie carries Tom directly to the front flight deck, only to discover a terrifying truth. The pilot's seats are completely vacant. The hijackers have abandoned the controls. Sophie sprints back to the passenger cabin, shouting to the crowd, demanding to know if anyone possesses flight training. A brave passenger stands up, stating he can try to guide the aircraft. She immediately ushers the volunteer through the security barrier and into the cockpit. The moment they cross the threshold, Sophie slams the heavy security door shut, locking it securely before Farid can follow them inside. Meanwhile, in the jump bay, the remaining hijackers are pulling on tactical scuba gear, preparing to leap into the ocean where a retrieval boat is waiting. Inside the flight deck, Sophie's physical appearance continues to decay into a demonic state, causing young Tom to shrink back in absolute terror. The volunteer pilot assesses the dashboard, realizing the craft is currently locked into an automated autopilot route. Sophie studies the closed-circuit security monitors, watching the hijackers map out their exit strategy. She instructs the pilot to hold steady and wait until the moment they leap out before disabling the autopilot. However, 8-Ball's twisted mind puts the pieces together. He realizes Sophie survived the gunshot wound. Armed and bloodthirsty, he tracks back into the main cabin with Berg to hunt her down. A terrified passenger instantly cracks under pressure, pointing directly at the locked cockpit door. The two terrorist leaders arrive at the threshold, violently pounding on the reinforced steel and demanding immediate entry. Sophie turns to the volunteer pilot, ordering him to bank the plane hard and head back toward the United States. The pilot argues, yelling that European airspace is significantly closer. But one look at Sophie's glowing eyes and bared fangs completely paralyzes him with fear, and he instantly obeys her commands. The moment the hijackers notice the navigation instruments shifting on their tactical gear, they realize they are being turned back. Berg spins around to face the crowded cabin, grabbing a hostage to use as leverage. Without a hint of remorse, Berg executes the passenger in cold blood. He shouts through the cockpit intercom, telling Sophie that if she doesn't open the door right now, he will execute every single soul on board, one by one. When the door remains locked, he turns to 8-Ball, commanding him to bring forward the next target. The psychotic criminal smiles, wading into the rows and dragging a screaming little girl out by her hair, forcing her to stand right in front of the cockpit spy camera. Before the trigger can be pulled, the security lock clicks. Sophie throws the door open and charges like an apex predator. She slams into Berg, sinking her fangs directly into his jugular. The sight of a literal monster tearing a man apart leaves Bastian and the passengers frozen in absolute horror. Inside the flight deck, the volunteer pilot takes advantage of the opening, slamming the security door shut and locking it tight. Sophie drains the life from Berg, leaving his lifeless shell on the floor before turning her gaze to the remaining terrorists. In an absolute panic, the surviving hijackers sprint away, cascading down into the lower cargo bays to escape her wrath. But the nightmare is only expanding. On the floor, Berg's corpse begins to twitch as the vampire infection reanimates him. Hearing his horrific, unnatural growls, Sophie spins around and brutally destroys his head, putting him down permanently. 8-Ball watches the entire supernatural display through a viewing slit. Sophie walks to the cockpit door, whispering to Tom through the glass, telling him to keep the lock engaged no matter what, as it's the only safe place left on the plane. She then retreats into the small passenger restroom. Staring into the mirror, she gasps at her reflection. Her skin is deathly pale, her hair is falling out, and the monster has completely taken over. Meanwhile, in the lower hold, 8-Ball rifles through Sophie's abandoned belongings, pulling out her personal journal. He marches back to the surviving cell members, tossing the notebook down. He tells the crew that their opponent is a literal creature of the night. Carl, who hasn't witnessed the transformation firsthand, scoffs at the claim, refusing to believe in fairy tales. He is far more concerned with 8-Ball's rapidly deteriorating sanity. To prove his point, 8-Ball brandishes a powerful, high-intensity industrial UV light bar, explaining that light will fry her alive. Back in the restroom, Sophie desperately plunges another suppressing dose into her arm, triggering another deep memory from her early days as a newborn monster. We see a past version of Sophie trying desperately to soothe an infant Tom, while her internal bloodlust rages out of control. When the baby's crying reaches a fever pitch, the inner demon wins out for a split second, and she snaps, letting out a terrifying roar at her own child. Horrified by what she almost did, she sprints into her bathroom, grabs a heavy tool, and violently smashes out her own newly formed fangs to ensure she can never cause her son harm. Weeks later in the memory, she tracks down the ancient European estate where her curse originated. There, she is confronted by an elderly, aristocratic man, the father of the pureblood vampire who bit her in the woods. the old man reveals a tragic truth. His son could never tame the hunger, and neither can she, regardless of how much medicine she takes to look human. Claiming their species brings nothing but misery and death to the world. The old man levels a firearm and shoots her in the chest. Back in the reality of the cargo bay, 8-Ball is using a hunting knife to shave down a thick wooden broom handle into a lethal stake. The remaining hijackers are engaged in a fierce argument about how to salvage their mission. Carl tries to reason with Bastian, telling him that their singular hope of survival involves breaching the flight deck and manually overriding the navigation system to land safely. Up top, young Tom can no longer bear being separated from his mother. He disobeys orders, popping the safety latch and stepping out into the aisle while the volunteer pilot screams at him to get back inside. Tom sprints to the restroom door, prying it open to guide his weak, transforming mother back out into the open air. The second the volunteer pilot sees her monstrous state, he panics, slamming the cockpit door shut on them both. Sophie struggles to her feet, sensing danger as 8-Ball emerges from the floor hatch. But the psychotic criminal is fully prepared for a hunt. He holds the wooden stake in one hand and the industrial UV light in the other. He flips the switch, blasting Sophie with a wave of intense ultraviolet radiation. Her flesh instantly begins to blister and smoke, and she collapses onto the carpet, knocked unconscious by the sheer agony. 8-Ball looks up, shouting to his crew to retake the flight deck while he stays behind to study the creature. Spotting her discarded syringe, a twisted idea forms in his mind. He drives the needle into her arm, extracting a vial of her corrupted vampire blood. Just as he raises the sharpened wooden stake to drive it through Sophie's heart, Tom steps into the aisle, leveling a stolen firearm directly at 8-Ball's head. The fearless killer simply smiles, stepping toward the boy with slow, mocking strides. The moment he reaches out to violently wrench the weapon away, Tom's finger tightens on the trigger. The weapon discharges, and the stray bullet shatters one of the passenger windows. Instantly, a violent explosive decompression rips through the cabin, throwing the heavy aircraft into a dangerous, uncontrolled dive. Up in the cockpit, Bastian's emergency instruments flare red, warning that the cabin has exactly 10 minutes of oxygen remaining before total hypoxia sets in. If they don't drop altitude immediately, every single person on board will asphyxiate. Through the roaring wind, Sophie manages to crawl forward, pulling an emergency oxygen mask over Tom's face. She scoops up the fallen firearm and pumps around into 8-Ball's chest, sending him scrambling back down into the lower compartments. Meanwhile, inside the flight deck, the volunteer pilot is overwhelmed by the dropping pressure. As he struggles to secure both his mask and the door latch simultaneously, he loses consciousness from lack of oxygen. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the surviving hijackers smash through the barrier, retaking physical control of the flight dashboard. In the main cabin, Sophie drags Tom through the debris, handing him over to Farid for protection. Suddenly, the aircraft pitches forward, entering a terrifying nosedive. Ignoring the gravity drops, a bloodthirsty Sophie drops back down into the lower cargo bays to hunt down 8-Ball. She tracks him to the interior of a reinforced, bulletproof transport vehicle parked in the hold. She unloads her weapon into the reinforced glass, but the rounds bounce off harmlessly. From behind the safety of the glass, 8-Ball smiles, raises the syringe filled with Sophie's blood, and plunges it directly into his own neck. Sophie bangs on the glass, begging him not to release the virus, but it's too late. Within seconds, 8-Ball's anatomy undergoes a horrific, accelerated mutation. Realizing she has birthed an absolute monster, Sophie knows there is only one option left. She sprints through the cargo crates, grabbing crates of flammable high-proof alcohol and a box of matches. She races back to the vehicle, dumping the fluid directly into the broken cabin seals. She strikes a match, tossing it into the fluid. The vehicle erupts into a roaring inferno, engulfing 8-Ball in flames. In the orange glow of the fire, the words of the old vampire patriarch echo in her mind. Monsters like them must be purged before they infect the world. Driven by absolute rage, Sophie shatters the window and begins brutally pulverizing 8-Ball's burning face over and over again. With his final breath before the flames take him, 8-Ball spits out a chilling prophecy. She will never be able to tame the monster scratching inside her. Upstairs, the hijackers manage to pull the plane out of the dive, stabilizing their altitude. However, the dashboard instruments alert them to a massive fire raging in the lower deck. They prepare to descend and extinguish it, but Sophie has already managed to suppress the flames down below and is currently climbing back up the maintenance ladder. The moment the terrorists spot her charred, demonic form rising from the floor, they panic and open full automatic fire into the aisle. The sudden gunfire triggers an absolute stampede among the passengers, who scream and scramble toward the forward galley. Farid tightly grips Tom, running with the crowd to keep the boys safe. Down below, the surviving crew members check the burnt-out vehicle, only to find 8-Ball's mutated, charred form still twitching with life. Before they can react, the burning monster launches himself out of the vehicle, tackling Cortez and tearing into his throat to feed. He drops the corpse and charges up the steps toward the living. Upstairs, a panicked Sophie slams the main cargo access door shut, locking the infection below. Through the thick steel, she hears Tom's terrified screams echoing from the main cabin. "Let me go, they're trying to kill me." Farid tries to soothe the frantic crowd, yelling that the boy is completely harmless. But the terrified passengers have lost their minds. A man draws a weapon and fires a round directly into Sophie's shoulder as she enters the room. Enraged, her internal predator takes complete control, and she launches herself at the shooter, brutally tossing the surrounding passengers aside like ragdolls as they try to pin her down. She locks her sights on Farid, advancing with lethal intent. Seeing his friend in mortal danger, young Tom bravely steps between them, shouting at his mother, begging her to remember who she is. His voice pierces the fog, and she hesitates, sparing Farid's life. Suddenly, a chorus of unholy screeches echoes from the lower floor. The infection has spread. The turned crew members are trying to breach the deck. Sophie realizes that if the pack escapes into the cabin, everyone dies. She sprints back down into the hold, throwing her weight against a heavy security barrier to pin 8-Ball behind it. Farid scales down the ladder right behind her, adding his strength to the door. In a flash, 8-Ball's arm punches through a gap, sinking his fangs deep into Farid's forearm. Just then, a surviving traveler fires a barrage of bullets through the door, forcing the monster back temporarily. Farid collapses, clutching his infected arm. Sophie realizes the virus is traveling through his bloodstream, leaving her with a horrific tactical choice. She raises a sharp piece of metal debris and cleanly severs Farid's hand at the wrist, stopping the infection from reaching his heart. Meanwhile, down in the shadows, a newly turned Cortez is clawing his way up the structural supports. Sophie engages in a brutal close-quarters brawl, successfully neutralizing both Cortez and 8-Ball's immediate vanguard, while managing to pull a terrified flight attendant out of harm's way before she can be turned. She retreats back to the main cabin with the survivors, where she finds Bastien waiting. Farid, clutching his bandaged stump, addresses the hostile crowd, explaining that the monster is the only reason they are still drawing breath. Sophie grabs Bastien by the collar, dragging him into the cockpit. The co-pilot studies the fuel meters, delivering a grim reality check. They are running on fumes and must locate the nearest airfield immediately or drop from the sky. Understanding the danger of the fast-approaching dawn, Farid and Tom convince Sophie to retreat into a dark, windowless electronics bay situated directly beneath the cockpit floorboards. Farid stays topside to assist Bastien with navigation. Minutes later, the co-pilot manages to patch into the radio tower of a nearby Scottish military airbase. He alerts the controllers that the flight was compromised by terrorists, but claims the passengers successfully fought back and quarantined the hostile force inside the lower cargo bays. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, Tom slips away to hunt for his mother's missing medication. Suddenly, the rhythmic, metallic pounding restarts as the infected horde down below begins tearing through the floorboards, their unholy screeches filling the cabin. Among them, a severely injured passenger, realizing his wounds are fatal, decides to surrender to the darkness. He crawls down into the hold, tracking the noises. He locates 8-Ball, popping the safety latches on his containment and begging the monster to turn him. 8-Ball doesn't even look at him. He simply tears through his flesh and vaults up into the passenger cabin. Sophie and Farid can only watch through the monitors as the main deck transforms into a scene of absolute slaughter. Terrified survivors sprint down the narrow aisles, violently throwing themselves against the cockpit door to find sanctuary. Fearing the cockpit will be compromised, Bastien refuses to drop the security locks, leaving the passengers to their fate. Down in the crawl space, Sophie realizes a horrifying truth. If this plane touches down and those monsters set foot on land, it will trigger a global apocalypse. Farid agrees but offers a desperate counter-strategy. They must land the aircraft to save the child, but the moment the wheels stop, they must detonate the homemade bomb to incinerate the infection. The two sprint down to the fuel lines where Yuri's makeshift explosive is rigged. They successfully locate the active detonator, but discover a catastrophic flaw. The countdown timer is missing. Realizing what must be done, Sophie volunteers to serve as the manual trigger. She tells Farid to get the survivors out, and she will manually detonate the charge once the vessel is clear. Tom overhears the sacrifice and refuses to let his mother die alone. Before anyone can grab him, the boy seizes the industrial UV light bar and sprints directly into the monster-infested cargo hold to retrieve the missing countdown timer. The moment his boots hit the floor, the turned passengers lock eyes on him, giving chase through the narrow maze of crates. Tom treats through the shadows, narrowly evading their claws. Miraculously, his hand closes around the missing digital timer, but as he turns to escape, a vampire tackles him from behind, sending the heavy UV light bar shattering across the floorboards. Watching the feed from the cockpit monitor, Sophie lets out a feral roar and charges down into the dark to save her son. Before she bolts, she demands confirmation from Bastian that the landing coordinates are locked in. The co-pilot confirms the craft is locked into an automated descent matrix, meaning air traffic control can guide the final approach remotely. Sophie turns to Farid, locking eyes with him and forcing him to swear a blood oath that he will guard Tom for the rest of his days. Then, feeling her humanity slipping away entirely, she sinks her fangs into Bastian's neck, feeding one last time to gain the strength required for the final battle. Down in the cargo hold, the vampire pack has Tom backed into a corner. 8-Ball steps through the crowd, claiming the boy as his personal prey. Before his claws can touch the child, Sophie drops from the ceiling like a meteor, slamming into 8-Ball. A savage, blood-soaked brawl erupts between the two apex monsters. During the chaotic struggle, 8-Ball manages to sink his fangs deep into Sophie's neck, draining her strength. Watching his mother dying, Tom realizes he has to change the battlefield. He scraps to the manual cargo door controls, pulling the emergency release lever. The massive bay doors open into the freezing sky, creating a catastrophic vortex of air pressure designed to suck the monsters out into the atmosphere. Up in the cockpit, Farid watches the structural alerts flare. Down below, the vacuum isn't enough. A bleeding 8-Ball manages to claw his way back inside, advancing on a defenseless Tom. Reacting instantly, Farid disengages the automated flight stabilizer, pulling the control yoke hard to one side. The massive aircraft banks sharply, tilting the open cargo bay directly toward the horizon. A blinding wave of morning sunlight floods the cargo bay, hitting 8-Ball squarely in the chest. The monster erupts into a roaring column of fire, instantly turning to ash. Desperate to keep his mother alive, Tom slices his own palm, pressing his bleeding hand against her lips to feed her. The fresh blood jumpstarts Sophie's system, and her eyes snap open. But the transformation is now absolute. The human mother is gone, replaced by a feral, unthinking predator. She lunges at Tom, her jaws snapping just inches from his face. Fighting the last shred of her soul, she manages to throw him away from her, crawling deep into the dark recesses of the cargo hold to protect him from herself. The scene transitions back to the military airfield, where an exhausted Tom is violently shaking the military translator, begging her to send a team to rescue Farid. But the prejudiced commanding officer scoffs, stating coldly that Farid matches the profile of the German terror watch list and will be treated as an enemy combatant. Tom screams at the top of his lungs, trying to explain that they need to quarantine the vessel before twilight, warning them that once the sun goes down, the monsters inside will slaughter everyone on base. Ignoring his warnings, the medical staff force a heavy sedative into Tom's system, knocking him unconscious. Colonel Drummond takes total control of the tactical grid, ordering his heavily armed strike team to hold position. Inside the silent, darkened fuselage of the plane, the vampire pack is quietly feasting on the remaining bodies. Outside, the military speakers blast a command for Farid to step out with his hands up. Farid grabs the cockpit radio, desperately trying to convey the supernatural danger lurking beneath the floorboards, but the command center dismisses his frantic pleas as a terrorist delaying tactic. When he refuses to step out, a sniper takes the shot, blasting a round through the cockpit glass and wounding him. Snipers and breach teams storm the entry ports, violently tackling Farid and dragging him out onto the tarmac. They believe they've stopped a bomb plot, completely oblivious to the supernatural nightmare they've just unleashed by breaking the quarantine seal. Meanwhile, an automated military ambulance is speeding across the tarmac to transport Tom to a secure hospital facility. Inside, the boy feigns sleep, snaps his eyes open, grabs a loose syringe from a tray, and plunges it into the neck of the attending paramedic. The medic slumps over, and Tom scoops up his stuffed teddy bear before throwing the rear doors open and leaping out onto the asphalt at high speed. The moment his feet hit the ground, he sprints back toward the aircraft. At that exact moment, the military breach team inside the cabin is ambushed by the hidden vampire pack, who tear through their armor with supernatural savagery. A wounded Farid, pinned to the asphalt outside, screams at the soldiers to fall back, but his words are drowned out by automatic gunfire and human screams. Through the smoke and flashing tactical lights, Fareed spots young Tom sprinting toward the open passenger steps. He screams for the boy to stop, but Tom keeps running until he reaches the platform. He looks inside, and his heart shatters into a million pieces. There, in the dim light, is his mother, completely feral, unrecognizable, and actively draining the blood from a dying soldier. Looking into her hollow, glowing eyes, Tom finally accepts the painful truth. His real mother died the moment she saved him. Without a single tear or hesitation, his hand slips into his pocket, and his thumb presses down on the remote bomb detonator. A split second later, the entire commercial aircraft erupts into a massive, blinding ball of fire, instantly incinerating the vampire plague once and for all. Drummond and his high command can only watch in stunned silence as debris rains down on the runway. Through the falling ash, Farid uses the last of his strength to crawl over to the lone boy standing on the tarmac. The two survivors pull each other into a tight, tear-soaked embrace, weeping for everything they lost in the sky. If this thrilling breakdown kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to smash that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel for more high-octane movie recaps. See you in the next video.